Today we're going to add 3 new additions to the shelves of the library. 3 different authors, 3 different stories, 3 different visual languages. So stick around to check it out. Tom, can you roll the intro, please? When you build a world long enough, something strange begins to happen. At first, everything feels open. Every possibility, every creative direction, every texture, every symbol, illustration and design that you make feels like it can be the part of the world. But the more you define it, it sort of starts to define you back. A world slowly develops rules, a visual language, a tone, a sense of what belongs and what doesn't. And that's a good thing. Those are things that make the world feel believable. But it can also become a trap, because eventually you stop asking, is this interesting? And you start asking yourself, does this fit into this world? And once that happens, experimentation becomes difficult. You start protecting the world from ideas that can actually help it grow. And now that's a very paralyzing thought for any creative, if you ask me. That's the tension I started feeling with the Order of Curiosities. I love the visual language that I've been building for it so far. The mysterious documents, the old world typography, the magical bureaucracy, the strange characters and artifacts. But sometimes I want to try something different, something that might not exactly feel like it belongs there. Maybe it's a different form of an artistic expression. Maybe it's a use of a different style. Maybe it's just a different color palette that is so unusual to me. Maybe it's something colorful and punchy and acidic. Something more expressive just for the sake of creative exploration. And instead of forcing these ideas into the world, I came up with something different. A place where incompatible or seemingly incompatible ideas could exist without needing permission. And this is how the idea for Bibliotheca Obscura was born. Now, if you remember, the goal with Bibliotheca Obscura is to eventually reach a point where we have designed 100 books. And if I take my sweet time and just make 1 book per episode, we're gonna be here for a very, very long time. So today we're gonna make 3 designs instead of 1. But these aren't just random books. Each one of them explores a different way of thinking. I want to create one that leans into intricacy and philosophical obsessions, another one that explores systems, authority, and hidden structures, and the third one that just wanders into the unknown entirely. And that's what Bibliotheca Obscura allows me to do, not just to create books and designs, but to experiment with perspectives and different styles. The first book that we're going to be creating today is called Pulling Strings in the Symmetry of Thought by Lidorius S. Copernicus. The author became obsessed with the idea that a thought may not be entirely isolated on its own. That somewhere between intuition, human connection, and coincidence, there exists an invisible symmetry between minds. And this book doesn't try to prove it scientifically, but rather to obsess about it philosophically. And for this particular book, I already had some ideas in mind that I wanted to design a cover like this, but I never had the actual book name and author for it, until a friend of mine suggested to create this book, and just so happens that the theme of the book and the design idea that I had in mind, they coincidentally work. And I knew that I wanted this cover to be intricate, deliberate, perhaps even overly constructed in some sense. Like the design itself is trying to impose structure onto something that is unknown. pulling strings in the symmetry of thought. The name itself plays harmoniously into the idea of using some sort of a string instrument as a metaphor. I've traced an image of a violin to give the base shape to start of this design. What I was looking for is sort of a container that will define the boundaries for my ornaments. With the first pass, I simply want to create a balanced pass for the stems of the ornament. Sometimes you'll see me obsessively repeat the same stroke multiple times. It's because I'm looking to get the correct curvature of the stem to cover the container proportionally. Now, I'm making a pass to thicken up certain areas. This creates a feeling of depth by simulating slight shadows, but also it creates an overall contrast to the piece. Adding the fine details is always the most satisfying, but also the most difficult for me. I'm still learning about this art style, and observation and studying alone is not enough to understand how to shade consistently. Only practice helps me understand that. Now we bring in colors and typography. We want this to feel magical after all. For the typography, I simply want a kiss-cut, stamp-like feeling, and it's easy to achieve that by removing the fill and simply applying an embossing effect. For the metal hardware ornament, I'm using a stock photo for the corners, but I'm also gonna try to simulate the same effect for the neck and other pieces of the violin. The trick seemed to be just doing multiple passes with a noisy brush over and over, borrowing the colors from the stock image. And the final touches of the highlights are really helping sell this idea, I think. By the way, I didn't forget. They came into the channel, said, "This is amazing," instantly subscribed. So we're gonna be instantly thanking you for that. Thank you and welcome. One thing that I've realized when working on a project like this is that the visual worlds that we're building, they slowly become narrower than we expect them to be. At first, limitations, they feel inspiring because you have a framework which you can adhere to and design whatever you want. But if you're not careful enough, those borders and that consistency can turn into hesitation quickly. And again, you stop trying things because suddenly those ideas no longer belong there. And I think that's dangerous creatively, because I think the most interesting and the most inspiring ideas, they usually arrive slightly out of place. Anyway, back to the second book. The second one is called The Invisible Ledger by Cyril Sinners. And this one moves away from curiosity and more towards systems. The Invisible Ledger is sort of a study of unseen structures of debts never written, agreements that are never spoken, and balances that are always sort of kept somewhere. It explores the quiet machinery of power, where every action is recorded somewhere, even if no one sees the record. Sinners suggest that these hidden systems may not be beyond our understanding, that with enough attention, one can predict the patterns, understand the balance, and perhaps even influence it. Not through force, but through understanding. And when I was thinking about the book cover, I thought perhaps we can try something more authoritative, structured, intentional, less emotional, and more institutional. I wanted this book to feel like it's not asking for your attention. It assumes that it already has it. This was exactly the time where I understood that there's something more important about Bibliotheca Obscura. It isn't just the library and the lore, it's a system. A place where ideas don't need to justify themselves before they have the reason or permission to exist. Different styles can exist next to each other. Different visual languages can coexist without the need to merge them into one singular identity. Because the library becomes the thing that connects them. Not consistency, not lore explanations, just pure curiosity. And that realization, it removed such a huge portion of creative friction for me, because suddenly I was not designing anymore for consistency. I was designing for discovery and curiosity once again. And isn't that just a lovely thing? Now, the third book that I was tackling is called The Strange of Patagonia by Jacques Tesh. Jacques Tesh is an investigative traveler who hunts the most obscure and improbable ideas imaginable. Be it misplaced creatures, impossible ecosystems, rivers that shouldn't exist, legends that most people dismiss immediately. And he does it not because he expects discovery, but because he understands that exploration itself, that's the destination. The Strange of Patagonia is essentially a collection of impossible pursuits and peculiar discoveries. And visually, I wanted this book to be less controlled, more expressive, more vibrant, almost as if you found his personal diary and not a book on a shelf in a library. By the way, Jacques Tesh has 7 published works, so you can expect one of his books to come back in a different episode of Bibliotheca Obscura. I drew probably half a dozen of different bugs, but ended up tracing a picture to get the desired shape. I mean, if it's not working, then it's not working, there's no shame in that. Now I'm just going to detail this illustration a bit and then drop it into Illustrator to create a repeatable tile. I sort of knew that I wanted a vibrant color for this one, but I decided to create a variation of the same color palette just so I can have some slight variance to the pattern. And finishing off this design with just a gentle personal touch, again trying to make it feel like a personal notebook or a diary of sorts. I think these would look amazing as a set of many notebooks. Now, these are the final versions of all 3. They are all very satisfying to look at, and perhaps I should print them on a large canvas. I mean, I must not be the only one that is obsessed with printing artwork. Anyway, let me just roll a little bit of music with the different angles on each design in hopes that you can appreciate the work and love that I've put into these special books. You know, looking at these 3 books, it feels like they shouldn't coexist. Different aesthetics, different philosophies, different visual languages. But that's exactly why this library exists. Not to force everything into one coherent identity, but to allow them to coexist independently. And honestly, I think every creative project needs a place like this. A place where you can experiment without worrying whether something will fit the bigger image. Because sometimes the things that feel the most out of place end up being the most powerful ideas that can move something forward. Some books do belong in the story, and some just to sit quietly on a shelf to be discovered. And maybe that's all it needs to be. As usual, thank you for joining me in this episode. Let me know which of the 3 books speaks to you the most. And as usual, if you have any ideas for future book designs, drop them in the comments. I'm creating a list of potential books to design based on your prompts. And once again, stay kind, stay curious, and go create something, because it is absolutely worth it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.